Soldiers have deposed Guinea's president and dissolved the constitution. They say they acted in response to the people's will. So what's next for the West African nation, and can military coups restore democracy? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashim Ahalbara. Guinea has a long history of instability and military takeovers. The West African nation now faces political uncertainty after elite soldiers overthrew President Alpha Conde. In 2010, Conde became the first democratically elected leader in Guinea since its independence from France. He amended the constitution to allow him stay in power beyond the two-term limit and won a third term in a disputed election. That move sparked widespread protests, and his opponents accused him of veering towards authoritarian rule. On Sunday, he appeared in a video surrounded by guards after heavy gunfire was heard near the presidential palace in the capital, Conakry. Armed soldiers announced on television the president was detained, then dissolved the constitution and imposed a nationwide curfew. They say they're acting in the best interests of the nation.
The personalization of politics, of political life is over. We will no longer entrust politics to a man. We will entrust it to the people. We come only for that. It is the duty of a soldier to save the country. The only thing that motivates us is that we are going to put in place a system that does not exist, and we must all build this system together.
The move has drawn concern from regional and international leaders. The West African Economic Bloc, ECOWAS, has condemned the takeover and is threatening sanctions. And the UN has called for Alpha Conde's immediate release. Members of Guinea's outgoing cabinet gathered in parliament after being summoned by the coup leader. Nicholas Haq has more.
Some government officials and prime ministers have answered the calls made by the coup leaders and made their way to the People's Palace, otherwise known as the National Assembly. We saw the prime minister under heavy escort going there. The message was clear from the coup plotters that if the ministers or government officials did not show up to this meeting, then they would be it would be seen as an act of rebellion, and there would be consequences to that. Already overnight, during the nationwide curfew, several high officials and commanders of the security forces have been arrested. So have been a few of the ministers. Now, the coup leaders, led by Mamadi Doumbouya, who is the head of Guinea's special forces, a former French legionnaire, says that he has dissolved the Constitution, the National Assembly, and taken full power in order to restore institutions that reflect the people. During the process of the coup, we saw people taking to the streets in celebration. There's also the expectation that more than 400 political prisoners would be released following this coup. Still in the hands of the coup leaders is former president or president of Guinea, Alpha Conde, who is still being held despite demands from the international community that he be released. Nicholas Hawk for Inside Story.
Guinea is the third West African country in 5 months to experience a violent transfer of power. In April, the president who had ruled Chad for 3 decades was killed while visiting soldiers fighting rebels and replaced by his son. In May, Mali's vice president arrested the president, prime minister, defense minister in the second coup there in 9 months. The same month, a military unit in Niger made a failed coup attempt days before the inauguration of the president. But while the number of coups is increasing in some parts of Africa, countries such as Senegal and South Africa have no history of military takeover. And Ghana has held 7 back-to-back elections since 1992. Let's bring in our guests in Casablanca. Adama Guy is journalist, author and former director of information at ECOWAS. In Accra, Kwesi Anning, Director of Research at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. In Uppsala, Jesper Bjarnesen is Senior Researcher at the Nordic Africa Institute. Welcome to the program. Adama, what do we know about this National Committee of Rally and Development? Are we talking about disgruntled soldiers, mutineers, or officers who said it's about time for a real change in Guinea?
Look, this is the outcome of a race to power, a race to life even, because the gentleman who was forced to take over from President Alpha Conde was a safe-hand man he has believed would protect him when he brought him through 3 years ago, Colonel Mamadi Doumbia, to protect him from other people. So there is a very well-known Guinean who passed away 1 year ago, Mr. Mamadi Jane, close friend to Alpha Conde. But this is Mamadi Doumbia. So when he realized that he was going to be sidelined by Alpha Conde, he decided to pass to the next stage and decided to make the coup. So he has done it as a friend, a protector of Alpha Conde, who belongs like him to the Malenke ethnic group. And indeed, this must come as a surprise to Alpha Conde. He would never have expected a military coup to be like his right-hand man against him.
Okay, Kwesi, this seems to be an act of betrayal, as Adama Guy has been saying. But it seems that Mamadi Doumbouya, the coup leader, is taking advantage of the growing, simmering discontent in Guinea.
Well, I think I agree with Adama, but it's not just about the growing discontent. It's also a reflection of the disrespect for established rules and procedures relating to command and control, relating to promotion, relating to training, but equally importantly, the failure of security force assistance from those who have supported the Guinean government and the Guinean military over time. I think Alpha Conde and his government also overlooked the demographics, the sense of frustration, the sense of exclusion, the sense of victimhood, and the sense of dispossession. So if you listen to the narrative coming from Mamadou, moving away from the personalization of politics, of creating a new system in which everybody is involved, as Adama has said, he's tapping into the wider public disaffection that the people of Guinea have felt over a long time, particularly with respect to his successful attempt at tweaking the constitution and for him to illegally stay in power. This is terribly unfortunate, it's painful, but it is not wholly surprising that it also took place.
Jesper, a leader's dream most of the time is a dignified exit, but that does not seem to be the case with Alpha Conde. We saw the pictures of him being tied, disheveled, surrounded by officers and taken into custody. Is he to blame for what happened yesterday?
Well, I would certainly argue that he bears responsibility for the unfortunate development we've seen in Guinea over the past 5 years, which is a growing move towards, as you said in the introduction, more authoritarian leadership style. The constitutional amendments last year certainly was a step in that direction. So Alpha Conde has been signaling that he would be clinging on to power, not just by grabbing a third term in office, but also by centralizing power around the presidency. So in that sense, I would definitely say that he bears a large part of the blame, and you can see why the Guinean people would be frustrated with that development.
Adama, what is fascinating about Guinea is that most of the time, a soldier, a dictator, would easily trample the constitution for political gains. But this is an activist, an opposition leader who understands the very complex political landscape in the West Africa. Yet he decided last year to trample on the same constitution just for him to stay in power indefinitely. What happened to Alpha Conde?
Alpha Conde has just become crazy, erratic. He's not the Alpha Conde I've known since the 1990s, early 1990s, when he was a friend of us in Paris and in Africa, when we were campaigning for the democratization of Africa. So last year, I wrote a piece and I said, Alpha, you should leave. You should know that your time is gone. You should allow other people to take over. Don't bring your country to this situation. You should remember what happened to your close friend, Laurent Gbagbo, who was taken into his house, into his bedroom by military forces, and this can happen to you. This is exactly what happened. So Alpha Conde is not the one we knew who were fighting for democracy. Is somebody who turned into autocracy, and literally he was no longer willing to listen to any voice of wisdom. He lost all sense of reality and all sense of wisdom. He was like a young boy insisting that he would maintain himself in power as long as he could remain there. He was willing to kill people. He was surrounded by sanctions from France, from even Tony Blair, who became his economic advisor, controlling, let's say, the mines in Guinea Conakry of Simandou that he helped him manage, and the likes of Bernard Kouchner, former French foreign affairs minister, by the way, who helped him in 2010 to win a presidential election that he didn't actually won. Because it was a victory of his main opponent, Cellou Dalein Diallo, but people closed their eyes. They said Alpha Conde was a democratic crusader. Let's give him a chance, despite the conditions under which he acceded to power. But unfortunately, and I tried to talk to him, when I met him at the African Union 4 years ago, when he was elected president of the African Union, that day, he literally wanted to fight with me physically because he said, oh, Adama, you said that Jammeh is in my country in Guinea. You will see. So Alpha Conde has become a crazy person, and I'm not
I see your
saying
point.
It's a reality.
Kwesi Anning, you don't turn overnight from being a political leader, an opposition leader, into a dictator. Don't you see other elements converging here, like influence of international key players, particularly countries interested in the booming mining sector, who must have advised him to stay in power to consolidate their own financial gains there?
Well, I think that is only part of it. But the primary challenge is what Adama has said, that we didn't know him anymore. This, and it's not only Alpha Conde, several present African leaders are chameleons who appropriate the narrative and the discourse and the language of the rule of law, respect for human rights, of democratic transitions, of free media and free elections, only to hype and con people to get power. When they do that, and I think Alpha Conde has demonstrated this, and several African leaders have demonstrated so, they then get external forces or leaders to back them, to provide the necessary tools of oppression so that dissent is destroyed, people are murdered, and then undermine state institutions. So, for example, in Guinea, and I think Adama has mentioned some names, these are people who would not be able to perform and behave in a similar manner in their countries, okay? But they extend economic aid, investments, security force assistance in terms of training, equipment, sending them to military schools outside, and then using these collective tools to oppress their own people. Let me make this point and make it very clear. Because of Chad, Mali, and now Guinea, a signal has been sent both to the armies of the Sahelian countries and West Africa, and particularly to the oppressed people, that they can take power back. Unfortunately, the military's interventions are not the most useful most of the time, and it's most unfortunate.
All right. Yes, but what kind of message does the coup in Guinea send to the rest of the African continent, particularly in West Africa? Does it increase the appetite of army officers to say, you know what, why don't we do the same thing?
Well, I think there has been a trend, and it goes back at least 10, 15 years of a combination of two types of crisis. I think we should think of military coups as a symptom of another kind of coup, which has been happening across not just West Africa, but the continent more widely, which is a more constitutional crisis. You have incumbent presidents changing the constitution at will in order to stay in power, and you have a general sort of lack of confidence in the electoral system in many parts of the continent. And I think these things go together in the sense that there is more room for maneuver for military actors to then claim a role in the political game, so to speak. I would also just want to say that I think the international community bears a part of the responsibility as well. I think it's sort of striking how little consequences there have been towards the coup makers, especially in African countries of late. And I think the signal that the international community is sending is that security is the top priority. As long as countries stay relatively stable on the surface, both elected leaders and military actors can get away with quite a lot of abuse of power without seeing any real consequences.
Kwesi Anning, we had a sense about 2, 3, 4 years ago that the trend of military coups is starting to move downward in Africa, and that this could perhaps usher in a new era of pluralism, democracy, elections. Now, this does not seem to be the case anymore. We've seen the trend moving upward.
Well, I mean, I think the optimism of the mid-2000s, the optimism of a much more inclusive democracy, transparency, rule of law, the respect for human rights, that optimism has not been fulfilled. We've got a group of individuals who have used the narrative and the rhetoric of inclusiveness to get power and then to undermine the same institutions. But let me tag into what Jesper said. One is the failure of the international community to hold these leaders responsible and accountable. So, for example, I mean, these leaders and states have signed on to a lot of instruments by ECOWAS and the African Union. But there has been an inability by these two institutions, plus their peers, other heads of states, to hold their friends accountable. Because Guinea just did not happen. It was gradual, incremental erosion of personal freedoms, of constitutional rights. And as Jesper says, the combination of undermining constitutional processes backed by the deliberate manipulation of elections and electoral institutions have tapped in to the frustrations that we are seeing. So there are multiple levels of failure, both domestically, but certainly on the international scene. And if that failure or these failures are not dealt with, we will see at least 2 or 3 more coups d'etats before the end of the year.
Yes, but what do you think should be next for the African Union? The African Union itself had a go about silencing the guns, putting an end to this culture of military coups. Will it be able to put more pressure on the military junta now in Conakry?
Well, I think that what we've seen in similar cases, so for example, in the case of Mali more recently, is that there's only so much you can gain from isolating a military regime. I think that the way forward is definitely through dialogue, and I do think that the African Union has a fairly good track record of encouraging dialogue with all involved parties, and I think that must be the road ahead here as well. So rather than threatening sanctions and isolation only, I think the African Union needs to be very proactive now in sending a delegation to Guinea, involving both the military junta and the political parties in a broad-based dialogue in order to ensure a transition that hopefully will have a civilian leader eventually. I think that should also be part of the goal here, is to take the military as much out of the equation as possible, as soon as possible.
Kwesi, we try most of the time to stay away from drawing general conclusions about what is happening in parts of the African continent. But don't you get a sense that military coups are endemic to the continent? Since the independence of most of the African countries, we've seen somehow 200 military coups. Is this normal?
No, it's not. And I think the case of Ghana, of Senegal, of South Africa, of Botswana, of Namibia, of Kenya, actually demonstrate that with strong civil societies, with good leadership, increasingly embedded political processes underpinned by shared values and shared norms, that we can begin to shift societies away from endemic militarism. Look, building democratic institutions and processes are difficult. There can be reversals. And even in a successful situation such as Ghana and Senegal, there are occasions where the conversations become fairly tense. There are misunderstandings. You know, when demonstrations do take place, the route control measures can be quite tough. But nevertheless, with sophisticated, savvy leadership, and in the role of the media, we can begin to see a gradual shift towards a more inclusive, dialogic process. And when democracies begin to bear fruit, in which even though the economic situation is difficult, there is a sense of optimism and hope that as we continue to dialogue,
but here is the concern.
As we continue to build institutions.
Here is the concern, and let me go to Jesper. In the past, coups were built against the backdrop of a previous military coup. So it was an army officer rebelling against his boss. Now you have something different, which is a military coup against established democracy for at least 1 decade or 2 decades. And when you look at the West African, you're seeing this pattern, which is basically military officers taking over in places like Mali, and you see what happens in Mali. You have now a new case in Chad, and then you have the failed coup in Niger, and you get a sense that there's something wrong about that part of Africa.
Well, this is a part of Africa that is struggling in terms of economic development as well, in terms of quite a lot of measures of human development more broadly. So you can see that these are states under pressure in many ways that are not just about the way the state administration is structured. But I think that one lesson that I drew from the developments in Mali is that even under civilian rule, the military is never far away. The military is always close to power. And that is a problem. The problem is that it is too easy for different segments of the military establishment to sort of decide on their own initiative to draw a line and conduct a coup. So there's definitely need for some form of reform in many of the military structures. I'm sure that Kwesi is much more knowledgeable about these things than I am. But I think there is a problem with the military being too close to power. And then I also think that even in countries that are not in the midst of this kind of upheaval, we need to have more sort of committed conversations to what is happening with constitutional democracy, because it does seem that there is a lot of anxiety around elections, even in fairly stable countries. We've seen it in Kenya, for example, that you do have widespread accusations of fraud, you have protests, you have violence. So I think there is a deeper conversation to be had about the roots of constitutional democracy, but also of removing the military from the inner circles of power.
We'll have to leave it there, gentlemen. Jesper Bjørnesen, Kwesi Anning. Unfortunately, we lost contact with Adama Guy a while ago because of technical problems, but we're looking forward to having you in the near future for more conversation about different events unfolding in the African continent. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashim Ahl Barra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.